So there are many ways that different states have handled this, right? Again, a lot of these, we're talking about historic efforts. The 60s, 70s, 80s were when virtually all states that adopted the model penal code framework did their work. The political, a lot of other dynamics shifted into the 80s, and the feasibility of large-scale criminal justice reform stopped. So when we're talking about how other jurisdictions have done comprehensive criminal code reforms, we're really talking about this time period, 60s, 70s, 80s. And some of them worked in a legislative process that it was operated, designed, the restructuring came out of years of work headed directly by a legislative committee. In others, there was, again, a kind of a separate commission model, right, that queued up recommendations that were then undertaken by and reviewed and eventually passed by the legislature. So different models in how they went about this process, but in each one, one thing I'd emphasize is, the model penal code. Those unfamiliar, it was put together by this body of jurists, a wide spectrum of judges, legal practitioners, many of the most well-respected jurists in the country, formed the ALI, and they went through this multi-year process and reviews and votes to issue it. It is in the end still a model. And there have been some subsequent models put out for particular pieces of legislation, be it sex offenses, be it human trafficking. And some are distributed by advocacy groups. Some have been distributed by other government organizations. And all of those over time have been part of the background for code reform in other jurisdictions, but never, with few exceptions, the more particular some of the bills are, if they're just focusing on a new crime, sometimes one of those models is just grabbed and adopted and stuck into a criminal code without much consideration of how it works with other offenses, how it works with other definitions. That's usually, it's not a good process. The typical way of doing this, and certainly what's been done in all the large scale reforms, is to look at these best practices and models and really try to adapt it and meld it with existing law and practice. Feasibly, to start over with a clean slate, it would be incredibly disruptive, right? Already with something like the RCCA and its scope, there's going to have to be a great deal of retraining on particular pieces. But if the case law, which again will continue to do a lot of work, right? Like discretion has to be used, and language is always going to be a little bit fuzzy on the edges. So the case law and the judicial function is always going to be important. Hopefully we can move it from reliance to say what the core elements are to being little questions about interpretation and how to apply a law. But going forward, that's still going to be important, and we're going to want to carry a good bit of that past case law, 100 years of work of litigants and experience and trained lawyers in the district. We're going to want to bring most of that forward, and again, change it as necessary per mandate. But that's the goal for reform. So I just really want to emphasize there's no way to just kind of take and jump forward without huge costs in terms of the ability of the system to function. We instead want to cut out the pieces that have to be cut out, that are clearly outdated or inappropriate. We want to shift the others bit by bit, and we want to change the framework for the criminal code so that in the future, as the council drafts future legislation and criminal laws continue to change, there's a consistent way that future laws are also brought in and fit into this whole system. So, I think that's the experience from other jurisdictions that we kind of looked at and brought forward. More recently, I would add that a number of jurisdictions have tried to do some work around sentencing or particular places, and that is valuable and useful too. But most of those jurisdictions are working from a framework, a criminal code that has at some point in the past 60s, 70s, 80s, had this comprehensive reworking and modernization. For us, the districts never had that, and it makes any changes to the criminal code now really difficult to even get control